now that those semantic elements have been added to the HTML, it's about time also that we open and rather create a style sheet. I'm gonna click on this shortcut that'll take me to W3 Schools. They have a sample to use really quick here of how to insert a style sheet. It's going to be in the head of your HTML. I'm going to copy this line. This is something from Web 1. We're just going to link a style sheet, and we'll give it our own name. We can use mystyle.css or styles.css or whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to copy that, go back to Visual Code, and here, since I'm in the root folder of my site, F. Rodriguez, I'm going to open up create a new folder, and that's where I'm going to put in my styles. And within this folder, I will create a new document. That's a new file here. Click on that, and I'll call it, why not, I'll keep mystyle.css. That's what I copied and pasted, or rather, I'm going to copy and paste. Within the head, I'll put it right after my title. I already copied it from the browser. I'll just paste. And it's linking to mystyle.css. However, since I created the styles folder, just before my styles, I will type in styles / and mystyle.css. I'll save by pressing Command S, Control S, same thing in Windows, and well, now I have, since I just created it, mystyle.css, it's open and it's waiting for me to give it some information. Something that I'm going to do, that I want to do, is go back to W3 Schools. I'll close this part though, and going to the grid view section that they have. I provided the link for you here on this assignment, W3 Schools CSS grid view, and basically, what is a grid view? Think of your page as having 12 columns, and then that way, if you want a header that goes all the way across, you will have an element that is represented by the 12 columns, or by 3, or by 2, or 1, or however wide you want your elements to be. That way, when we are talking about responsive design, these elements will play nice with each other and eventually stack on top of each other so that they work well on a large browser screen like this, or work just as well in your mobile devices. So I'm going to start by copying some elements that they recommend. First of all, we're going to click, or not click, but rather copy all of this, these 3-4 lines, and copy and bring it over to my styles.css and paste. The asterisk is going to affect most everything. It's going to be a global CSS style that the box sizing will be determined by the bordered box. For more information, to read the page. So they do have a section on that in there as well. They're giving us an example of how a responsive web page might appear, so that think about it this way, that you want a quarter of the page to have a menu when this website is done, or this page is done, and then the rest of the 3/4, 75%, occupy some other space. As I said, in this instance, I want to have this label, or rather the header, to go all the way across for now. I want to have a small menu on the left, and I want to have a footer that goes all the way across, and then I'll play with some area where my photo and my information will be on the right over here. It would be, I guess, nice if I could have a camera that's showing you the, if I'm drawing a sketch of this, but you'll see what I mean as we go along. The next thing that I want to copy is the CSS that they're providing here. It's very simple. It's just basically, it starts with dots. That means these are classes that we can apply to our tags that we've already put in. Then it goes from one column, and think of one column as 8.33% of the page. that is how wide one column is, for example, here, and how wide it is when you have 12 columns all the way across. Don't think of it as a finite number. Don't think of it as 25 pixels or 30 pixels or whatever your page divided by 12 is. Think of it in percentage, so that when your screen gets smaller or larger, then by calculating the percentage, it will always be one column as opposed to one static measurement. I'm going to copy all of these values for 1 to 12 columns. Go back to the CSS, and after the initial brackets, I'm going to paste it there. These brackets, when they open up in one line and close in the last one and have everything in between, are compressed in these, but just to make these easier to read, they put them all in one line. Otherwise we would have a whole bunch of these all stacked together, and really it's just easier to read it this way. So now I have those two main elements inside the CSS, the definition of all the columns plus the resetting of some code at the top. So I'll go back to this page, and next all of these columns should be floating to the left and have a padding of 15 pixels. So in between there'll be 15 pixels. But so for each one of these columns, we can assign a CSS that says that this class it defines everything that starts with column 12, 11, 10 all the way to 1 will be affected by this coding. So I will copy this and take it back and paste it. This is only one way of doing a responsive page. There are multiple frameworks out there. We will be exploring different frameworks later on in the semester. Particularly, we will be using Bootstrap. We might come back to use a different CSS grid as well. But this is just a fairly easy way to get started on building responsive websites. So they tell us that meantime in the HTML, things also need to start to change. So they say, well, whatever it is that you want to have be affected by these columns should have a class of row. And they just created a division that they're going to be using for their example. In our case, it's the go back to index. It's going to be this main section that I created. If you just used a regular section, or maybe used an article, maybe you used a div, that's fine. Just to stay within semantics, I call it main. And this main will have a class that is going to be called row, since we've already pasted, or we already pasted all this, but we're going to paste the row CSS that follows right here. So the row will basically say that anything that happens in those columns will be cleared right after. So that way we don't have problems with our columns stacking on top of each other later. That being copied, I'm going to paste, and I continue. I'm going to press Ctrl S just to make sure that I'm saving this as I go along. Something we need to start to consider is what is this page going to start to look like? And one of the things that we can do is real simple, since it's already made for us here. I'm going to copy the example code that's provided. It's changing the font family to Lucida, which is another sans serif, kind of like Arial, Verdana, etc. I'm going to copy the colors that they have for the header and menu, etc. that will start to appear in a little bit. These are kind of funky colors. There's lots of purples and some greens and yellows, and we can change them. You can change them as you best like to use them. So once I copy that, I'll just paste it onto my CSS file. There's some shadows also that will be created by CSS, so that'll be pretty cool. I'll save this so that it's there and ready for me to start poking around with the values. Next thing, let's take a look at our HTML again and start to add some of the CSS that we've been pasting onto the CSS file. And although we've made some, we have already inserted some of these things, let's see what happens if I save my file, both the CSS and the index, and reload my page. Still nothing's been affected, nothing has changed, even though if I go and view the page source, it tells me that it is loading the CSS file, but it's not finding it. So let's see what we can do to make sure that this works. And let's see, it's looking for mystyle.css, and my file is actually called mystyles.css. So something's got to give. I can go into the visual code and tell it to rename that file, and I'll call it mystyle so that it finds it. That being done, I'll save it again, make sure index, and let's see what it looks like if I reload this page. Well, now there it is. Now it finds it with the correct name, mystyle.css. In my index file, just the HTML, let's see what this would look like if I reload it. The main thing that it's done, it's applied the font change. Everything else, haven't really done much with it. Although I have declared that this is going to be a header, I haven't given it the style specification. About me is going to stay, but it's going to be on the right, and some of these things I'm going to move to the top so that they can become part of the menu that's going to appear on the left side. So it's at some point my menu, the one that I keep on talking about, that the page that we're following, the responsive web design promises, it's going to be on the left. I have to put in, or I don't have to, but I will put in an aside that will hold the menu, and then I'm going to add an article, maybe two, that will load up things on the right side. Our footer will be controlled by itself. It'll be its own footer. In the meantime, though, I can say that our header has a class of page header, since I've been copying and pasting everything from the W3 pages. Let's see what they have in plan for header. They just called their header. So I'm gonna change this in name to page header, page capital H header. ULLI haven't applied it yet, so that should work okay. Row we've already used, so then I'll save that. If I reload my page, and actually nothing would happen. This is the one on my site. This is the local one that's being affected. Let's reload that, and that's loading up the funky color for the CSS, and this is the one that I tell you we can definitely change it. And, you can change it to your preferences. For now, I'll just continue to use their colors just to know that we're doing something. Go back to my index.html file, and first thing, let's see, well, keep on saying first thing. The first thing we've done a long time ago, but now the next thing. Let's give it a space for the menu to appear. So I'm already in the main. That's going to be the main. That's going to be the two columns to the right that include the two columns in the whole thing. One's going to be the menu, and the other one is going to be the article, or two articles. So I'm going to open this aside that I was talking about. I'll type in aside and give it a class of, let's say it's going to be three columns. So I'll say call -3 and then specify menu. Since in my style CSS we have a column 3, and then we're also going to be adding parts of the menu class that have already been defined for us. So I'll close the tag, and now my aside is closed by the program. Here, I guess this is where I don't want to put the about me, not inside this aside. So let me open up the space for the aside, which will be an article. So I'll type in open bracket and article, give it a class that will take up the rest of the space. I've already used 3 columns with that column 3. So I have 12 to work with. I'll use column 9. Close the article. And then this closing tag I can move somewhere else that makes a little bit more sense. Maybe after everything that I say about myself will be the end of that article. It opens up over here where it says about me. And let me save that. Control S. Let's see, what do I do then with this other thing with the menu? Well, let's see what it looks like on the page. Since I saved this, I've saved my style.css. Make sure that everything is saved. Go back to my page and reload, and things are already beginning to happen. So by applying the CSS that we've been copying and pasting, and saying that this aside is going to be a menu and this article is going to be our main focus, we have started to move the direction of the page. I still haven't coded, or rather tagged or styled the footer, so it's still kind of plain. You'll notice that just for reference, they have added borders to our spaces so that we know what we're working with. I'll go back to the editor and see what's going on, since I do have this aside created. Rather than having it blank, or rather than it loading up the assignments, I think that since I already have links for my interests and my favorite song and things like that, I can move these things more about me and put them up there and see what happens. Since we already have an unordered list, I would say that we could copy it, but that's actually the assignments, which I just said we don't necessarily want. We want these more about me links. Makes a little bit more sense, at least for now. Let's see, where can I copy? I'm not going to copy anything. I'm going to go back to where I want to put the menu, which is inside the aside. And I will create an unordered list. So open up UL. And inside put in a few list items. So there's 1, 2, and maybe 1 more. And rather than, like I said, copying assignments, I'm going to copy the links that I've added for my interests. Here I'll copy, or rather just cut, Control X, and I'll put it on the second one. On the first one, I will put in a little sort of a pseudo title for now, and say that this is going to be more about me. And then I can get the other tag, the other link, which is going to be, oh, that's the badge. Actually, I want this, my favorite song. Cut that and put it in that other list item, the third one. And then, since I got rid of all this stuff from within, gutted it, I can get rid of all of this other code. Leave the footer there by all means. And what else can I tell you about this? Well, one thing that looks kind of wrong here, it's that main closest and then footer closest. If I look at my page, I don't have a footer yet, but I would like to think that all of this area here is the main, and then the footer would come along. So the footer would actually need to open after the main closes. So that closing tag for the main, I'm going to cut and put it before the footer begins. And while I'm at it, I'm going to press Control A to select everything, Command A on the Mac, right click on that code and tell it to format the selection so that it cleans it up a little bit. We've made lots of changes. I'm going to save, go back to reload this, and it looks a little bit better, more about me. It's a button, but we can change that later. In the meantime, if I click on my interest, it will actually take me there. Don't have anything fancy about this page. I'll go back by returning to my home. Assignments are loaded here. My badge, which at some point needs to say that this is confirmed and verified and all that, will be changed there. In the meantime, my style.css, I'm going to see about those borders that we keep on seeing. So right now it's affecting every single column. By adding this class, I can either remove this altogether or keep it there for later. I'll just say that this border has no width, and that way we won't see it. It will not appear. The padding remains, the floating remains. I'll save that after the change and see what's going on. I reload the page, and sure enough, those are gone. Next thing, I guess I could make this photo go to the right, so that it loads up a little bit better than that, just being stacked like that. The CSS, then I'm going to ask it, or rather put in some CSS that moves the, or rather floats that image to the right. That will have to match with the row that we're working with, that row class. So I'm going to add to the row class an image tag. So class row, effect or change the image, curly bracket, and within there just tell it to float to the right, float colon right, semicolon to end, and let's see, if I save, go back to save the CSS, go back to the page and reload it. That moves it to the right. It was probably going to be a little bit too close to the text at some point, and by that I mean when this page begins to get narrower, as it would on a mobile device. See how right there it just kind of goes right to the left of the image. Don't necessarily want that. So I will add to that CSS margin to the left, so that'll be a margin left, and let's make it I don't know, 10 pixels, and semicolon to end. Save it, Control S, and that should give us a little bit of extra space so that it's always there. My image here, which at some point I'm just going to replace with a blank square because I don't have a mirror in front of me, and I'd rather not have that in front of me either. But since I'm asking you to have it, I'll keep it there. I'd rather have it aligned with my name maybe, or even the about me, so it needs to be somewhere else in the HTML. So in the HTML page, let's see where it is right now. It's my song and all that, my style, blah blah blah, and here I am. It's this paragraph, these 3 lines. I'm just gonna cut them out, Control X, and go into the, let's see, the beginning of the page where I have the aside. This is where the menu lives, and then I have the column 9 space beginning, that article. I'll put it right there, save it, and reload it, and then my image moves to the top. Last thing that I want to do with this, and then I want to move along, is maybe I'll keep the assignments in this thing here. I just need to tell it that, tell the HTML that footer has a style that's called page footer. If I go back to my style, I don't see that we have added the footer code just yet. So I don't know whether, well, rather than copying and pasting, at least from the W3 page, let's just see right here I have the page header code. I'll select that and copy that, paste it right after, and call this, rather than page header, call it page footer. So page footer with a capital F. It's going to have the same colors. Save it. Control S. The footer's already got a class of page footer, so when I go back here, should reload it the same way. And like I said, for now it doesn't have anything attached to it. I could move the assignments below, but in the meantime we have styled the page somewhat and added CSS that is becoming responsive. You'll notice that the menu on the left only occupies 3 columns of a 12 column space. The photo remains the same and stays stuck to the right. So this is a good start. Still an incomplete page, but we'll keep on adding this as we work along.